I never thought being ordinary could provoke so much disdain. The first time I realized this was at my cousin's engagement party, standing in her gleaming kitchen while my siblings gathered around the marble island, their voices rising with animated stories of promotions, international conferences, and weekend trips to cities I couldn't pronounce. I held my glass of cheap wine, the bottle I'd brought, clearly outclassed by the champagne everyone else seemed to afford, and listened to my sister describe her latest client, a tech startup that just secured millions in funding. "And what? About you, Sarah?" my cousin asked, turning to me with that tilted smile people use when they're being polite but not really curious. "Still at the elementary school?" The way she said it made teaching sound like a temporary phase, something I'd eventually grow out of once I got my life together. I nodded, feeling the familiar shrinking sensation in my chest. "Yes, 4th grade this year." "That's sweet," she said, already turning back to my brother, who was explaining his promotion to regional manager. Sweet, like I was a child playing house instead of an adult who'd chosen her path deliberately. I slipped away to the bathroom and stared at my reflection. Same black dress I'd worn to 3 weddings this year. Same sensible shoes that had carried me through countless parent-teacher conferences. Same simple earrings Mom had given me for graduation. Nothing about me sparkled or demanded attention, and apparently, that was my greatest failure. Before we continue, drop a comment. Where are you watching this from, and what time is it there? I'd love to know how far this story is reaching. Sometimes the quietest stories travel the furthest. The drive home that night felt longer than usual. I passed the high-rise condos where my siblings lived, their windows glowing like beacons of success, and turned toward the modest neighborhood, where I still rented the same 2-bedroom house I'd moved into fresh out of college. The mortgage payments my family made seemed as foreign to me as their weekend brunches and designer handbags. I'd chosen differently, and every family gathering reminded me that different was synonymous with less. Mom was waiting up when I got home, sitting in her wheelchair by the window, the blue light from the television casting shadows across her face. She'd had the stroke 3 years ago, right when my sister was planning her European honeymoon, and my brother was considering that job offer in Seattle. Someone had to stay. Someone had to make sure she took her medications, got to her physical therapy appointments, remembered to eat more than toast and tea. "How was the party?" she asked, muting the late-night talk show. "Fine," I said, kissing her forehead. Loud. She studied my face with that particular mother instinct that could read disappointment in the set of my shoulders. "They don't understand," she said quietly. "Understand what?" "That staying takes more courage than leaving." I helped her to bed, checking that her water glass was full and her phone was within reach, then sat in my small kitchen with a cup of tea and stared at the stack of papers I'd brought home to grade. 28 4th graders, each paper representing a small person trying to make sense of fractions or struggling to express their thoughts about the book we'd read together. This was my world, small, immediate, real in ways that stock portfolios and business deals could never be. The comments started subtly, the way cruelty often does in families. "Sarah's so content with simple things," my aunt would say at Christmas dinner, as if contentment were a character flaw. "She's always been the quiet one," my sister would add, making quiet sound like code for unremarkable. They spoke about me, in third person even when I was sitting right there, as if my simplicity had made me partially invisible. At my brother's housewarming party, I overheard my cousin telling someone, "Sarah's the one who never left town, still teaches elementary school. She takes care of their mom now. It's actually really sweet. But you know, some people just aren't built for bigger things." I stood in his gleaming bathroom, looking at my reflection in his expensive mirror, and wondered when caring had become synonymous with small ambitions. When choosing love over advancement had marked me as someone who simply wasn't built for better things. The years passed in a rhythm that felt both peaceful and suffocating. I learned to arrive late to family gatherings and leave early. Timing. my exits before the inevitable comparisons began. I perfected the art of deflecting questions about my future plans, my dating life, my apparent lack of ambition. I became fluent in the language of making myself smaller, of taking up less space in conversations that seemed designed to highlight everything I wasn't achieving. But in my classroom, I was different. In room 14 of Lincoln Elementary, I was Ms. Bennett, the teacher who remembered that Marcus had trouble with math because numbers jumbled in his head, who knew that Aisha wrote poetry in the margins of her notebooks when she thought no one was looking, who understood that sometimes Jamie's anger was just fear wearing a different face. I stayed late most evenings, not because I had nowhere else to go, though that was often true, but because there was always one more child who needed help with reading, one more parent who wanted to understand why their kid was struggling, one more small crisis that required attention. My family saw this as evidence of my inability to set boundaries, my tendency to give too much of myself to people who couldn't give anything back. They didn't see the thank you notes I kept in my desk drawer, handwritten in careful third-grade cursive. "Dear Ms. Bennett, you make math fun." They didn't witness the moment when quiet, serious Emma finally smiled, or when class clown Diego sat still long enough to lose himself in a book. They measured success in salary increases and vacation photos, while I measured it in the gradual brightening of young faces, the slow building of confidence in children who'd been told they weren't smart enough, fast enough, good enough. The criticism evolved over time, becoming more pointed, less gentle. "Don't you want more for yourself?" my sister asked one Thanksgiving, her voice carrying that particular mix of concern and condescension that family's perfect. "I mean, don't you want to travel, have nice things, meet someone?" I wanted to tell her that I did have nice things. The clay mug one of my students had made me, fired lopsided but painted with careful flowers. The wooden bookmark carved by a father who spoke little English but whose gratitude needed no translation. The photo on my bulletin board of 28 grinning fourth graders, gap-toothed and joyful, and mine for one precious year. Instead, I said, "I'm happy," which was both true and insufficient. "But are you really living?" she pressed, and I wondered what she thought I was doing every day, if not living, fully, intentionally, with purpose she couldn't recognize, because it didn't fit her definition of success. The breaking point came at my nephew's graduation party. I'd spent the morning helping Mom with her exercises, then rushed to buy a gift I couldn't really afford for a kid who'd barely spoken to me in years. I arrived to find my extended family clustered around the pool, their conversations filled, with talk of college funds and career prospects and summer internships at companies I'd never heard of. My nephew, 18 and already taller than his father, accepted my gift with polite disinterest, a book of poetry by a writer I'd discovered and loved, thinking maybe he'd inherited some of his family's hidden depth. He set it aside without looking at it, turning back to his friends who were discussing their plans for gap years in Europe and prestigious university programs. "Sarah always gives such thoughtful gifts," my sister-in-law said, the pause before. Thoughtful, heavy with meaning. "She's so good at finding unique things. Unique. The diplomatic way of saying cheap, different, not quite right." I excused myself to use the bathroom and found myself in their guest room instead, sitting on the edge of their expensive duvet, looking at family photos that chronicled years of achievements I hadn't shared. Graduations, promotions, exotic vacations, wedding anniversaries celebrated at restaurants where the appetizers cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. There was one photo of all of us together, taken at my parents' anniversary party 2 years ago. I was in the back, partially hidden behind my brother's shoulder, smiling but somehow apart from the group even while standing among them. Looking at it, I realized I'd been disappearing from my own family for years, fading into the background of their more colorful lives. When I returned to the party, I found them discussing summer vacation plans. European river cruises, African safaris, month-long stays in rented villas with names I couldn't pronounce. My contribution to this conversation was my plan to spend July organizing my classroom for the next school year and August helping Mom with her garden. "That sounds restful," my cousin said. "The way you might comment on someone's decision to spend their vacation in a nursing home." I left early, claiming a headache that was becoming increasingly real. Mom was asleep when I got home, her breathing steady and peaceful in the way that had taken months to achieve after the stroke. I sat in my small living room, surrounded by the books I'd collected over the years. Not first editions or impressive hardcovers, but worn paperbacks filled with post-it notes and margin scribbles, evidence of a mind that found richness in ideas rather than objects. That night marked the beginning of my conscious withdrawal. I stopped attending optional family gatherings. I declined invitations that felt more like obligations. I learned to let phone calls go to voicemail when I could predict the conversation would leave me feeling smaller than when it started. I built a protective shell around the life I'd chosen, the quiet satisfaction I found in my days. It was during this period of intentional solitude that Maya came into my classroom. She was a transfer student, arriving mid-semester with a file, thick with behavioral reports and academic concerns. 11 years old, all sharp angles and defensive postures, she sat in the back corner like she was ready to run at the first sign of trouble. The other teachers warned me about her. "Good luck," they said, shaking their heads. "That one's been through 4 schools in 2 years. Parents are never around. She's angry about everything." But I saw something else when I looked at Maya, a fierce intelligence burning behind her, guarded eyes, a hunger for understanding that she'd learned to disguise as indifference. She reminded me of myself at that age, before I learned to make myself smaller, when I still believed my questions mattered and my thoughts had value. Maya tested every boundary I set, challenged every assignment I gave, and questioned every rule with the precision of a lawyer. Where other teachers saw defiance, I saw a brilliant mind that had been dismissed too many times. So I did what I'd learned to do best. I paid attention. I noticed that she read during lunch, hiding books inside her backpack like contraband. I saw how she lingered after class, pretending to organize her desk while stealing glances at the poetry books on my shelf. One afternoon, I found her crying in the hallway, clutching a crumpled test paper. She'd failed another math exam, and I could see the familiar shame in her shoulders. The same shame I'd carried whenever my family looked at my choices and found them wanting. "It doesn't mean you're not smart," I told her, sitting beside her, on the floor. "It just means we haven't found the right way for you to learn yet." She looked at me with skepticism earned through years of adult disappointment. "Everyone says I'm difficult." "Different," I corrected. "You're different, and different isn't wrong. It's just misunderstood." That became our project. Not just helping Maya pass 4th grade, but helping her understand that her intensity, her questions, her refusal to accept simple answers, weren't character flaws. They were gifts that the world hadn't learned to unwrap yet. I started staying after school with her, not for mandated tutoring sessions, but for conversations that wandered, from fractions to philosophy, from grammar to the injustices she observed with startling clarity. She told me about living with her grandmother while her parents worked 3 jobs between them, about feeling invisible in every school she'd attended, about teachers who'd labeled her as trouble before learning her name. "Why do you care?" she asked me one day, the question carrying the weight of someone who'd learned not to trust adult attention. I thought about my family, about the years of feeling unseen, about the particular pain of being dismissed by people who claimed to love you, because everyone deserves to be seen, I said. Really seen. Not just tolerated or managed or fixed, but seen for who they really are. Maya became my shadow and my teacher. She challenged me to articulate why I believed in education, why I thought small kindnesses mattered, why I'd stayed in a town and a job that others saw as limitations. Through her questions, I discovered that my choices weren't evidence of small dreams. They were evidence of deep faith in the possibility of transformation, one child at a time. The other teachers noticed the change in her. Her grades improved, but more importantly, her posture changed. She walked taller, spoke up in class discussions, started sitting closer to the front. She submitted a poem to the school literary magazine that made the visiting poet cry. She organized a fundraiser for the local animal shelter with the same intensity she'd once brought to disrupting class. But the most remarkable change was in me. Through Maya's eyes, I began to see my own worth reflected back. Here was a child who'd been written off by multiple school systems, who'd learned to armor herself against a world that found her inconvenient, and she'd chosen to trust me. She'd let me see her real self, brilliant, complex, fiercely protective of justice. And in return, she'd seen mine. Maya stayed with me through 4th grade and kept coming back. 5th grade, 6th grade, even when she moved to the middle school across town, she'd appear in my classroom after school, updating me on her progress, sharing her writing, asking for advice about teachers who didn't understand her intensity. "You're my person," she told me once, the words carrying more weight than any performance review or family compliment ever had. I watched her grow into her intelligence, saw her learn to channel her questions into purpose, her anger into advocacy. She started a peer tutoring program in high school, wrote editorials for the school newspaper about inequality, organized protests against the proposed budget cuts to arts programs. Everything she did carried the fingerprints of our conversations, the lessons we'd learned together about the power of being seen. When she graduated as valedictorian, she mentioned me in her speech, not as a teacher who'd helped her pass a grade, but as someone who'd helped her understand that her differences were her strength. I cried in the back of the auditorium, surrounded by parents who'd never questioned their children's worth, feeling for the first time like my simplicity had created something beautiful. Maya left for college on a full scholarship, her future blazing with possibility. We kept in touch through letters, then emails, then the occasional phone call. I followed her progress from a distance. Honors society, internships, graduate school, then the inevitable silence that comes when young people build lives too large for their small-town origins. Years passed. My family's gatherings became even more difficult to navigate as my siblings' children grew up and began collecting achievements of their own. My nephew graduated from law school. My niece landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm. Each success felt like an indictment of my continued simplicity, my persistent choice to remain small in a family that equated expansion with evolution. "Don't you ever want to do something that matters?" My sister asked me at our father's 70th birthday party, her voice carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd given up on subtle hints. I thought about Maya, about the dozens of children who'd passed through my classroom carrying wounds they couldn't name, about the thank you cards and handmade gifts and moments of breakthrough that had shaped my understanding of what mattered. But I'd learned that explaining invisible victories was like describing color to someone who'd chosen to see only in black and white. "I'm doing what I'm supposed to do," I said, which was both true and insufficient. Then, on a Tuesday morning, in March, my phone started buzzing before I'd even finished my coffee. Text after text, calls from numbers I didn't recognize, notifications from social media accounts I rarely used. Something had happened, something that involved my name, but I couldn't piece together the fragments of excitement and congratulations flooding my phone. I turned on the morning show while getting ready for school, half listening to the usual blend of celebrity interviews and lifestyle segments. Then I heard a name that made me freeze. Maya Rodriguez, now a successful actress and social justice advocate, was being interviewed about her latest film, a drama about educational inequality. But she wasn't talking about the movie. She was crying, her composed public persona cracking as she spoke about her childhood, about being failed by system after system, until one teacher saw her potential. "There was one person," she said, her voice breaking, "who changed my life. She believed in me when no one else did. When I was 11 years old, angry and lost and convinced I was broken, she sat on the floor of a hallway with me and told me I wasn't difficult. I was different. Her name is Ms. Sarah Bennett, and she taught in a small town that most people have never heard of. But I remember. I remember everything she gave me. The interviewer leaned forward, sensing the emotional weight of the moment. What did she teach you? That being seen is the most powerful gift you can give someone, Maya said, tears streaming down her face. She didn't just teach me fourth-grade math. She taught me that my questions mattered, that my intensity was a strength, that being different wasn't something to apologize for. She saved my life, and she probably doesn't even know it. My coffee mug slipped from my hands, shattering against the kitchen floor. On the screen, Maya was pulling out a folded piece of paper, aged and worn, from years of handling. I still carry this, she said, unfolding what I recognized as a note I'd written her in 6th grade, when she'd been struggling with a particularly dismissive teacher. It says, "Your worth isn't measured by how well you fit in. It's measured by how bravely you stand out." She wrote this for me when I was 12, and I've carried it ever since. The interview continued, but I couldn't hear it over the sound of my heart pounding. My phone was exploding with notifications, messages from colleagues, friends, neighbors, people I hadn't spoken to in years. The story was spreading, shared, and reshared across social media platforms, Maya's tearful tribute becoming a viral moment about the power of educators and the importance of seeing potential in difficult children. By the time I arrived at school, there were news vans in the parking lot. The principal, who'd barely acknowledged my existence in 5 years of working together, was suddenly treating me like visiting royalty. "Sarah," she said, her voice bright with newfound respect. "We had no idea you'd had such an impact." Maya Rodriguez, how extraordinary. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same simplicity that had made me invisible to my family had created something so profound that it had reached millions of people through Maya's success. The quiet moments, the after-school conversations, the belief I'd offered a difficult child, none of it had been spectacular or newsworthy at the time. It had been ordinary, daily, the kind of small kindness that happens in classrooms everywhere without fanfare or recognition. But Maya had remembered. She'd carried my words with her through college, through graduate school, through the building of a career that had taken her far from our small town. She'd remembered, because being seen had mattered to her the way being dismissed had mattered to me. My family's response came in waves. First, the shocked silence as the story spread through their social networks. Then, the tentative phone calls, voices careful and strange, as if they were speaking to someone they'd never met. My sister left a voicemail that lasted 6 minutes, her tone cycling through surprise, pride, and something that might have been shame. "I had no idea," she said. "I mean, I knew you were a good teacher, but I didn't understand the impact you were having. I'm sorry if I ever made you feel like what you were doing wasn't important." My brother sent a text that simply said, "Saw the interview, proud of you, always have been, even when I was bad at showing it." But the most meaningful response came from my mother. She was waiting for me when I got home from school, her wheelchair positioned by the window where she could watch for my car. Her eyes were bright with tears, but her smile was pure joy. "I always knew," she said, reaching for my hands. "I always knew you were doing something special. They just couldn't see it because it wasn't loud enough for them to hear." The attention was overwhelming and brief, the way viral moments tend to be. Within a week, the news cycle had moved on to other stories, other heroes, other moments of inspiration. But something had shifted permanently in how people saw me, and more importantly, in how I saw myself. Maya called me that weekend, her voice warm and familiar despite the years and distance between us. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I know you're private, and I didn't want to put you in the spotlight without warning. But I've been wanting to say those words publicly for years." "Why now?" I asked. "Because I have a platform now, and I wanted to use it to honor the person who made it possible." You taught me that quiet strength is still strength, that small acts of love can change everything. The world needs to know that. We talked for an hour, catching up on the years that had passed, the paths that had brought us both to this moment. She told me about her work with educational nonprofits, her efforts to support teachers in underserved communities, her upcoming project about the importance of mentorship in childhood development. Everything I do, she said, carries something. You taught me. You're in every speech I give, every program I support, every time I stand up for a kid who's been written off. You didn't just teach me. You made me who I am. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house, surrounded by the simple life I'd built, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete contentment with my choices. Not defensive satisfaction or stubborn pride, but genuine peace with the path I'd chosen. The next family gathering was different. Not dramatically. My relatives were still themselves, still drawn to the sparkle of conventional success. But there was a new hesitation in their voices when they spoke about achievements. A careful consideration before dismissing quiet accomplishments as insufficient. My nephew, now in his second year of law school, pulled me aside during dessert. I wanted to tell you, he said, his voice serious. I still have that poetry book you gave me. I never really read it until this year, but some of those poems, they're incredible. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate it at the time. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. The story of Maya's tribute had given my family a new lens through which to view my choices, and while I didn't need their validation, I was grateful for the peace that came with their understanding. But the most profound change was in my classroom. Word of Maya's tribute had spread through the school district, and suddenly teachers were referring struggling students to me, parents were requesting meetings, administrators were asking for my input on programs for difficult children. The work I'd been doing quietly for years was suddenly visible, valued, sought after. More importantly, my students seemed to sense the shift. They sat up straighter when I spoke, engaged more deeply with lessons, trusted me more quickly with their real thoughts and feelings. It was as if Maya's public recognition had given them permission to believe that I might be worth listening to. One afternoon, as I was straightening my classroom after a particularly good day, I found a note on my desk from Emma, a shy third grader, who rarely spoke above a whisper. Dear Ms. Bennett, it said in careful cursive, my mom told me about the lady on TV who said you changed her life. I wanted you to know you're changing mine too. Thank you for seeing me. I sat at my desk, holding that note, and understood finally what Maya had meant about the power of being seen. It wasn't just that I'd seen her potential all those years. Ego. It was that her success had made my quiet work visible to a world that had learned to overlook the small acts of love that shape children's lives. The celebrity interview had lasted 15 minutes. The viral moment had peaked and faded within days, but the recognition had created something lasting. Permission for my simplicity to be seen as strength rather than limitation, for my choices to be understood as intentional rather than accidental, for my quiet life to be valued rather than pitied. I still live in the same small house, still teach in the same classroom, still wear practical shoes and buy books secondhand. I still take care of my mother, still know the names of every child on my street, still find richness in the ordinary moments that others might overlook. But now, when my family speaks my name, there's a different quality to their voices, not the careful patience they once used for my limitations, but genuine respect for the work I've chosen to do. They've learned what Maya knew all along, that the loudest legacy is often the one whispered in the lives you've touched, growing quieter, with distance but never disappearing entirely.